Hi, I'm Richard Morais, Senior Minister at Unity of Phoenix Spiritual Center, and I want to thank you for visiting our website and for tuning in to today's message. If you feel inspired by today's talk, I really encourage you to make a donation by hitting that button below and making a contribution to this ministry. It'll allow us to continue these messages online and to do the great work we do here at Unity of Phoenix, which is to inspire people to live better lives. So thanks for tuning in, thanks for your support, and we hope to see you at a Sunday real soon.
So it's our tradition here at Unity of Phoenix for the minister of the day to tell a really bad joke before they do their talk. So I'm not one to break tradition, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. There are these 5 cannibals, and they're engineers, and they're really good engineers, but they have a really hard time finding a job because, well, they're cannibals. So they get a job at this engineering firm, and they go into the HR person, and he sits them down, and he talks about the job and the benefits, and he says, you know, the pay is really good here, the benefits are really great, and we have this amazing cafeteria. So you have to promise me that you eat in the cafeteria and leave the rest of my employees alone. So the cannibals promise to leave the employees alone. And about 6 weeks goes by, and everything's fine until one day, the cannibals are in the cafeteria having a cup of coffee, and the HR guy comes in, and he goes, have any of you guys seen one of our janitors? He seems to be missing. And they go, no, we haven't seen him. We don't have any idea where he might be. So the HR guy leaves, and the head cannibal goes, all right, which one of you is responsible? And one of the cannibals starts to giggle, and he goes, oh, he was delicious. And the head cannibal smacks him upside the face and goes, what were you thinking? In 6 weeks, we've eaten 3 vice presidents, 2 managers, and nobody missed them. And now all of a sudden, you eat the janitor? Well, again, happy Mother's Day. This is our second of our 4-week series on our book, Even Mystics Have Bills to Pay, written by the Reverend Jim Rosemurgy. And the title of my talk today is, Are You Willing to Prosper? Now, that seems like kind of a silly question. Of course you're willing to prosper. If I said, is there anyone who's not willing to prosper, would you hold your hand up? I hope not. I'd probably ignore it if you did. But don't we want more loving relationships? I know I do. If there's someone in your life that you're not quite right with, wouldn't it be prosperity to get that relationship off on the right foot where you could be back in a loving relationship? And what about getting a better job? Many of us are still working, and a better job might be more money, maybe more time off. All of that is considered prosperity, and I can always use more prosperity in my life. And yet what happens? Sometimes we go out, like, say, to lunch with our friend, and our friend says, oh, here, let me pick up the check. And we say, oh, no, I can't let you do that. Why are you doing that? You're stopping your prosperity when you do that. Prosperity is 2 sides of the same coin. For every act of prosperity, there's a giver and there's a receiver. And sometimes you're the giver and sometimes you're the receiver. But both of those events prosper the person who's doing them. Now, in traditional churches, there's this idea that being poor is really spiritual and that you shouldn't have lots of things and that you should just be as poor as you can be. And if you're poor enough in this life, sometime later when you die and you go to heaven, you're going to get all the riches of the universe. And the churches got wealthier and wealthier, and the people got poorer and poorer. And I'm not here to bash anyone. I'm not here. But what I am here to tell you is that Jesus had a different way of talking about this. Jesus said, for whatever you want, ask. And whatever you seek and whatever door you knock on, it will be given to you. Ask, seek, and knock. He said, and so I'm saying, why are we playing small? Why are we not accepting our good when it comes our way? Why do we say, I don't deserve it? Why me? Someone else deserves it more than I do. Well, I love to do Bible metaphysics. When I was about 16 years old, I decided that I was going to read the Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And that lasted about 2 chapters into Genesis. First of all, I was only 16. I didn't really understand what they were talking about. And there were all those these and those. It was kind of like Shakespeare, in that King James version. And I put it aside. I thought, it's too, they say one thing here and the opposite there. I can't do it. And then I came to Unity and I learned about Bible interpretation using metaphysics. And I thought, this is pretty interesting. And I discovered that the Old Testament is the story of our consciousness as we move towards enlightenment. And that every Bible character, there's an aspect of us in that character. And every time I read the story, it's a little bit different. I go a little bit deeper. That sometimes one character in the story is me and sometimes it's not me. And so I began to look at the Bible as a living document, as a spiritual text that can give me lots and lots of really good advice on how to live my life and how to be a good person. And so in honor of Mother's Day, we have a Mother's Day Bible story. And it's about the strength and determination and the will and the love that a mother has for her children. And I know all of you who are mothers can understand that. I'm a mother of 3 grown children, and I do just about anything for my kids. This story is from the Old Testament. It's coming from the 2nd book of Kings. And during the time when this was finally put down on paper, before that it was an oral tradition. People would sit around the fire and tell the story to keep the stories alive. And it was probably put down on paper somewhere between 2600 and 2500 BCE. So it's a very old part of the Bible. And it takes place in a time when the prophets were around. So this is 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 through 7. It's called Elisha and the Widow's Oil. Now the wife of a member of the company of prophets cried to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that your servant feared the Lord. But a creditor has come to me to take my 2 children as slaves." Now, usually in this time period, if a woman's husband dies, she would be taken into one of his brothers or his uncle's households. And they would take care of her and the children. They would make sure that the children grew up and had life skills and all of that sort of thing. So there must not be a family member that could take her in. And she's in pretty desperate straits here. But her husband was a servant of Elisha. He was one of Elisha's men. And metaphysically, he feared the Lord means that he was in awe of God. That to fear the Lord is to be reverent, to see God as amazing and wonderful, not to be afraid of him. So she pleads to Elisha for help. Now, as a mother myself, I do just about anything to keep my kids safe, and probably you would too. But it's interesting here, she says children and not sons, because in this time period, they usually just counted the boys, and the girls were just considered property. So she has children, so there must be a girl in there. Now, the idea that my child could become a slave is appalling. It's just mind-boggling to me. But 2,500 years ago, if you owed someone money and you couldn't pay it, you would go to a rich person and you would make a contract with them and you would indenture yourselves to them. It would be agreement, a formal agreement. I owe this amount of money and I will work this many hours until it's paid off, and then I will be free to go back to my home. But everybody knows what happens to children when they don't have an advocate, right? Even though that these children would be released when the debt was paid off, who knows what would happen to them during that time? Putting children in slavery just seems barbaric to me. But Elisha is going to come to the rescue because he's a very famous prophet, and he's a very good prophet. He's a man of God. Metaphysically, a prophet is one who speaks for God, one who receives the inspiration of spirit, and one who understands spiritual law and therefore imparts it to humanity. So he's kind of a go-between. The prophet stood between God and the people as a kind of intermediary to tell them, the people, what God wanted them to do, to tell them what was right in the sight of God. And today we know that we don't need an intermediary between ourselves and God, that we can have any kind of a relationship with God that we want, and that makes us mystics. So through the prophets, the people receive divine guidance. A prophet speaks out for God. Remember that E.F. Hutton commercial? When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. But there was some trouble sometimes when a prophet would speak the truth to the people about the rich people or the priests who were abusing people or charging too much or whatever unjust thing they were doing. If the priests or the rich people were taking advantage of people, the prophets would speak out and say, this is not right, don't do this. And of course, some of them paid the ultimate price for that. Metaphysically, Elisha means the I am. The I am is our naming power. When we say I am something, we're saying that's what we are. We're calling ourselves that. I am strong. I am smart. I am prosperous. I am beautiful. Don't use your I am power for anything negative, only for positive things. So the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, written by Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, says that many times Elisha is referred to as the forerunner to Jesus, because his character and his marvelous works are recognized as proceeding from the same spirit that inspired Jesus, and his gentleness and simplicity were compared only to the master. Now we know that Jesus was fully human and fully divine, and that as Christ Jesus, he was the ascended master, the mystic, who was always in connection with God at every single moment, in every single breath. Jesus was connected to God. So Elisha says to the woman, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" And she answered, "Your servant has nothing in the house except a jar of oil." Now, I bet in your pantry, you have several kinds of oil. I bet you have olive oil, maybe you have vegetable oil, I have sesame oil. I cook with all of them. But oil would be to these people as part of their daily diet, so it was life. This is not a small thing. Now, the oil was probably olive oil because they had olives in that area. They grew them. And the jar is likely ceramic. It could have been decorated or not decorated. It probably had some kind of stopper in it to keep the oil from coming out. It might have been made of ceramic also, or it might just as easily have been made of olive wood to keep the oil in. And it probably wasn't really big. It was probably somewhere in like a pint or maybe a quart. You know, today when there are natural disasters, the first responders go in, and what do they take with them? They take shelter, they take water, they take rice, they take dried beans, they take wheat, and they take oil. Because those things will sustain people who've lost their homes, who have no place to live, for as long as it takes in order to get their lives back in order again. They won't need electricity, because there probably isn't electricity during a disaster. So a small amount of oil would be a really precious commodity to this woman. Oil represents our gifts and our talents, the things that make us unique. The ability to paint or draw, the ability to play music, the ability to sing, the ability to be a good parent or to be a doctor or a lawyer. Those are all gifts that are represented by the oil. And the oil also represents substance. Substance is the non-stuff stuff is made out of. It's the stuff in the quantum physics that when you pray for something, it becomes the solid thing here in the world. So Elisha is telling the woman that she has everything she needs to be prosperous, even if she doesn't realize it. And that's true for each and every one of us. We have everything we need right now in this moment to be prosperous in our lives. And so he gives her a prosperity prescription. He says, go outside, borrow vessels from all your neighbors, empty vessels and not just a few. Then go in, shut the door behind you and your children, and start pouring into all these vessels. When each is full, set it aside. He tells her exactly what Jesus told us. See, ask, ask for the vessels, seek them out everywhere in the neighborhood, knock on the doors until you get as many as you can get. This is the preparation stage for miracles. The asking and seeking and knocking is the preparation for the miracles. And the empty vessels represent what happens when we go into meditation and we empty our minds of all error thinking and any negative thinking and anything that no longer serves us. If we have a thought of lack, we obviously can't be prosperous. Two things can't be in the same space at the same time. So please choose the prosperous thought. When we become the empty vessel in meditation, God will fill us up with abundance. Alicia's telling the widow, close your door, go into the silence, do your inner work to prepare for the good that's on her way. Anytime we want something better in our lives, we can go into meditation, go into the silence, empty our minds, get into that gap. Deepak Chopra talks about that space between thoughts, the gap. That's where the magic is. That's where the answer will come. Maybe not immediately, but soon. So she left him and she shut the door behind her and her children. They kept bringing vessels to her and she kept pouring. When the vessels were full, she said to her son, so see, she does have a son, bring me another vessel. But he said to her, there are no more. Then the oil stopped flowing. The family worked together as a team. Many hands make light work. And when the last vessel was full and there were no more empty vessels, the flow stopped. As long as we're the empty vessel for God to be poured into our consciousness, the flow will continue. As long as our hands are open to receive, good will come to us. When we are willing to be receptive to the flow of health and vitality and wholeness and prosperity and peace and joy and love, we will receive it. She came and she told the man of God, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your children can live on the rest. This is a very important prosperity lesson. Sometimes when it seems that everything is impossible, at those times when you're on your knees and you're having a dark night of the soul and you don't think you'll ever get out of the hole you're in, when you're just about ready to lose everything that's dear to you, remember to ask for what you want, to seek it out, to knock on every single door until the door opens and the flow comes, because God will always supply us with good. There's a story about a man who was a very righteous man. He was a good man. He was a good husband and a good father. He went to all of his kids' sports games and band practices and everything. He loved his wife. He was deacon in the church. And when he died, he went to heaven. And when he got to the pearly gates, it wasn't St. Peter that was waiting for him. God was waiting for him. He was surprised, and God said, you are such a righteous man. I wanted to meet you when you came to heaven. I want to take you on the tour. And so the first room they went in is this great big banquet hall, and the tables are loaded with all of this delicious, wonderful food. And God said, and you can eat anything you want and you don't gain weight. That's heaven if you ask me. And then they went out and there were golf courses and tennis courts and basketball courts and sports arenas and opera houses and symphony halls and movie theaters, everything you would ever want to have. And he took the man to the corner and he said, this mansion is yours. You can live in it now that you're here in heaven. And he goes, oh my gosh, my living room, my whole house would fit in the living room. And he was getting comfortable and he said, God, what's in that door over there? And God says, oh, you don't want to go in there. Yes, I do. I want to experience everything that's in heaven. Oh, no, you don't want to go in there. Please. So God takes him in. And it's a giant storehouse. acres and acres and acres big. And there's a big jewelry counter, and there are diamonds and gold bracelets and Rolex watches. And there are mansions with decorative furniture and swimming pools, and there are yachts, and there are everything people have ever asked for in their whole lives. And in the very back row, there's row after row after row of expensive luxury cars. And the man walks back and he's looking at the cars and he sees a Rolls Royce. He always wanted a Rolls Royce. And he gets in the Rolls Royce and he puts his hands on that hand-stitched leather steering wheel. And the dashboard is all wood with shiny instruments. And he sees this little gold plaque right there on the dashboard. And it has his name on it. And he gets really angry and he says, God, I wanted this car my whole life. Why didn't you give it to me? And God said, because you asked for a Ford. So are you asking for a Ford or are you asking for a Rolls Royce? You get the choice. You get to ask for whatever you want because the flow is inexhaustible. Inexhaustible. It never, ever stops. It's only limited by our ability to receive. Now, I'm not advocating for us to amass all kinds of stuff in our house. That's hoarding. Nobody wants to be a hoarder. But I'm saying if you're prosperous and you wake up one day and you say, I'd like to go take a boat out on Lake Pleasant, you call up the guy that owns the boat and you rent the boat for a day and you go out on the lake. And he gets the fee for taking the boat out. He's happy. You get a day on the lake. You're happy. We can have everything we want. You know, there really is beauty in simplicity. But what I'm saying is if you want to be healthy and you want to be loving and you want to be vital, ask for what you want. Seek it out. Knock on the door and you will be given. And God will heal you and heal your relationships and bring you a better job and give you more time off and you'll be healthy enough to enjoy it. Are your hands and your mind open to God's good for you? Or is your fist closed tight? Open your mind. Open your life to receive God's good. And the next time somebody says, I'll buy lunch, what are you going to say? Thank you, because if that's the only prayer, that's enough. Good, good. When you need a prosperity miracle, ask for it, seek it out, knock on every door, and then go into the silence, let go of any preconceived notions, and just be open to whatever God provides for you. And before you know it, your good is going to come flowing into your life in ways you have never even expected. And that's why I ask you, are you willing to be prosperous? Thank you.